What do you think of this Democratic strategy of sort of labeling the Republican Party and Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and whatever? That's just weird. What's your reaction to that? What's your guttural response to that?
So I'm on the, I get the DNC talking points mailers, right? They send out these little email lists.
Oh, really? All right.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean,
that's here's our talking points.
Yeah. Well, they call them talkers. They're publicly available. Anybody can find them.
Yeah.
But they send them out, and
talkers. Here's
yesterday,
the
they had a story yesterday where the headline was, I think it was J.D. Vance and his Silicon Valley billionaire weirdos want to cut taxes. Before that, it was, Vance is downright weird was in the headline. And then, almost on cue, you'll see, every Democratic politician using that phrase. But the really damning thing for me is seeing all of the people in the media use the same words. And, you just can't have that. It's such a bad look for the news media to not appear to be independent from
to play along with the talkers, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, okay, fine. If a politician wants to do that, that's their job. But reporters, I'm not going to use some word that you scripted for me. Are you kidding?
Yeah,
that's ridiculous. And so that's what the sort of comic compilations that you've seen. I think Dave Rubin posted it today, right? Of everybody using that word. They must know how absurd it is.
Oh my gosh, it's not credible. Yeah.
So why do they do it? I mean, who's being convinced by that? I guess it's a very interesting question.
I think it comes back to this question of who's being convinced by that. I think part of the problem, Matt, might be that a good number of people are convinced by it, actually. And I just think the problem comes back. People like you and I are often so focused on institutional failure that we forget just broader, pervasive civic failure of our citizenry. It's like, Jefferson's famous quote, you get the government the government you deserve is the government you elect, and the government you elect is the government you deserve. Mm-hmm. And in some sense, I think that the fact that people do fall for it is kind of what makes it work, is a sort of kind of pervasive laziness and lethargic tendency in the American civic spirit right now. I don't mean to be a downer about it, but I just think that kind of is true even outside of institutional failure.
I guess so. I mean, there's just so much of that now. I mean,
it's very self-fulfilling too. It recycles,
But again, I grew up a Democrat. Democrats, once upon a time, they used to pride themselves on being independent thinkers.
Right.
The prototypical great Democrat was a stand-up comic, right? That it was somebody who had fresh material, used, brash language. Now you have this thing where everybody's like a herd animal. I remember reading, a zoologist talking about how when 51% of the deer decide to bolt, they all go, right? Mm-hmm. That's how this weird thing happens. It's just somebody gets a cue, everybody goes. There are no holdouts. The entire news media environment speaks as one voice, and it's just embarrassing. It's just a terrible look. But
embarrassing is probably the right word, especially you coming from that profession. It is sort of embarrassing.
Can you imagine Cy Hirsch doing that and saying, he's really weird? Are you?
Yeah,
more prep.
It's just right? It's just I'm going to tell you what I think, not
right.
regurgitate what somebody else thinks. So that's on the media aspect, which I think is a great point, actually. I mean, if you look at the number of times within a concentrated 48-hour window that individual word has been used, it's not even like they use other words like bizarre, right? It's just no, that word, we're sticking to that word, does reflect that type of weird conformity. Now, on the content of it, because I'm also just interested, I've been reflecting on this.
So why did they do it?
Yeah, why did they do it? But not even from a political analysis, just from my own opinion about it, is I think it is an argument of the wrong kind, right? It is a disappointing form of American political argument to make because it's actually just anti-exceptionalism, right? It's against exceptionalism on its own terms. Like a guy like Pete Buttigieg, when I saw him on the weekend, right, on one of these shows, talking about J.D. Vance and Donald Trump is weird, it just felt disappointing to me. right? Because this is a guy I knew in college. I didn't, he was old. He was a senior when I was a freshman, so I knew him and knew of him better than he knew of me. But I remember being like, okay, I respect this guy. He wasn't somebody who would say, okay, somebody who disagrees with me is weird. And yet, part of the reason why is he was obviously, probably like me too, right? Like weird in a sense of just being, in his case, in Indiana in the 90s, hyper-achieving, scholastic overachiever, like shockingly articulate,
Jockey.
gay, at a Catholic school that went to Harvard. And, you substitute Indian American for gay and Ohio for Indiana. It's not like that different than my own background, right?
Right.
And like that was weird. And like now to just say, oh, no, we're not one of the weird ones now. Like they're weird. It's just weird referring to what reference point, right? Normal relative to what reference point. Whereas like America is the country where like we are unafraid to be weird. Our founding fathers, I wasn't joking before, were weird relative to the mores of their times because that's part of what American exceptionalism is about. So it just seems like such a particularly un-American expletive or disparaging comment to level against your opponent, as though it's like less about I'm worried about Republicans. I'm worried about like that word being deemed a bad thing. Right? America's weirdness relative to human history is part of what makes us us.
I mean, one of my heroes, Hunter Thompson, he said when the going gets weird, the weird turn pro. That was like a cool thing back in the day.
Say that again?
When the going gets weird, the weird turn pro.
I like that. I like that.
That's one of
that's kind of who we are a little bit. It's a statement of that, of
Yes.
American exceptionalism, right?
Yeah, and being weird and far out is kind of it's very much in the American character. The thing that's even more unusual though is that the current incarnation of the American left sees they don't even like the word normal. They think it's the word itself is bad somehow. They're into transgender boxing and all these other everything you see. If it's not transgressive, it's not okay. So for them to turn around and try to make weird an insult,
it's particularly weird. Actually, it's particularly self-contradictory